Okay, so in this module, we've done three things. We covered three main ideas. The first idea that we cover is that we're actually becoming an amazing world material power by the end of the 19th, early 20th century. You look at how we pick up the pieces after the Civil War, and we get to work, and we have a lot to work with on the North American continent. And you add to that invention and enterprise and industry and hard work. And all of it that is there for our disposal as Americans. And by the year 1900, we're ready to step upon the world stage, and we believe to do grand things, but not grand things for our own well-being, because that would be viewed as selfish, but grand things for God, or grand things for humanist purposes, or whatever it may be. But there's a draw to us to exert ourselves in the world by taking a part in it and by making it better. And you probably listen to that and you're like, what's wrong with that, Professor Corbin? That sounds like a wonderful thing to do. Why ought we not to take the power that we have and make life better for other people? Well, hopefully I've shown you kind of two strains of that way of thinking that challenge the idea. When you take a look at imperialism closely, the imperialism that is forwarded by Beveridge, there's a suggestion there that nothing is beyond our human limits, that if we just kind of align our soul correctly and we have a generous spirit, that whatever we do abroad will be done right and we'll be able to solve the problems that are out there throughout the world. Is that good thinking? Is that solid thinking, given what we know about how the world works, given what we know about ourselves and our own limitations? I think we have to take a step back and say, well, hold on there. There are things that we cannot possibly accomplish because we are not perfect. We don't have the power of God, and we won't have ultimate goodness in our hearts. Which brings us to the second tradition that we've gone over this module, progressivism. We note something that we believe is unjust, namely inequality. And the progressive believes that all of the forces of humanity ought to be employed to make things equal. Now, in part, equality is a wonderful thing, right? All men are created equal. It's something that we ought to cherish. But there's a type of desperate aiming for the implementation of equality that is scary, that ought to make you nervous. Must all things be made equal? And what would be a world that had been completely leveled by equality look like? Would that simply, by it being leveled and equal, be a just world? Or would it be a world that had been leveled, right, that had been brought down lower by being made equal? The progressive has a difficult time thinking of that because they view the ugliness of inequality around them, and they want with all their hearts to make the world again. So oftentimes it takes a literary type, a poet, to be able to kind of examine what's going on in a certain time or a certain place, because the poet has what power? The great author or literary type has what power? He has the ability to penetrate the human heart and to kind of get a sense as to what is driving certain human behavior, and then put it in a literary expression where we laugh or giggle, or we kind of come to grips with what is actually taking place within the human soul. And fortunately for Americans at the end of the 19th century, or throughout the 19th century, they had a man named Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens, who had this great ability to take a look at who we are and to tell the truth about who we are, noting those aspects of who we are that may be noble, but those aspects of who we are that may be problematic. So the last work that I have you read for this module is Mark Twain's A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. It's a very, very hilarious story. I assign one chapter within it called Free Men. If you want to read the whole thing, I would recommend it to you. But basically the story is this. Connecticut Yankee bumps his head and finds himself in King Arthur's Court. And what would a late 19th, early 20th century proud Albert Beveridge-like American do when they made their way to King Arthur's Court? Well, they'd complain. They'd look at what was going on and they'd say, something is amuck here. And that's exactly what Twain's character The boss does. He says very funny at the beginning of this chapter, how do people stand this miserable armor? How do they manage to stand it all these generations? How can they sleep at night for dreading the tortures of the next day? And he goes on to talk about the people and what they eat and how they bathe or don't bathe. And he said, measured by modern standards, these people are modified savages. This noble lady I came across showed no impatience to get her breakfast, and that smacks of the savage too. But then he talks about the real downtrodden of King Arthur's society. He says, in half an hour we came upon a group of ragged poor creatures who had assembled to mend the thing which was regarded as a road. They were as humble as animals to me, and when I proposed to breakfast with them, they were so flattered, so overwhelmed by this extraordinary condescension of mine, that at first they were not able to believe that I was in earnest. My lady put up her scornful lip and withdrew to one side. She said in their hearing that she would as soon think of eating with the other cattle, a remark which embarrassed these poor devils merely because it referred to them and not because it insulted or offended them. The lady who he's with thinks of other human beings as cattle. Think of the ugliness of that thought. To look at another human being and to believe that just because that human being is in a different bloodline, is not a noble, that human being is not your equal. Now that is the wonder and the beauty and the excellence of moving into a democratic age where hopefully we abide by and we're enlivened by the spirit of human equality, that we all are endowed by our Creator, right? And we all are made in His image. And we don't call another human being that looks different from us or has some sort of mental, disability inhuman or cattle-like simply because we're better than them or we think ourselves better than them. So Twain here remarks on that which is excellent about the modern American democratic spirit. But what he can't understand more than anything else is why these people bend down, kneel down to the authorities of the Middle Ages. Why do they abide by the church? Why do they abide by the nobility? Why do they cherish and embrace King Arthur's monarchy? He has this one line later in the chapter. What type of society is this where 994 men have to bow down and give all the things they do to 6 men who rule above them, who think of them as cattle? What type of backward universe are we living in the Middle Ages? So, of course, Twain's character, the boss, says, you know what? I'm going to get these men out of this situation. I'm going to start a revolution in King Arthur's kingdom. He says, I'm going to start a corporation, and I'm going to have these men start working for me, and they're going to build a whole new democratic machine, and they're going to become empowered by that machine, and we're going to overwhelm King Arthur's court. So think about what's going there in Twain's idea there. What does the American do as soon as he comes across an injustice? He believes that he has it within his power to solve the problem, to make things right. So how are we going to make things right? We're going to institute manufacturing and capitalism and trade. We're going to bring our notions, our modern concepts to play on the situation. And we're going to do what? We're going to believe it in our power to make the world anew. Twain's boss believes it in his power to overcome King Arthur's court. And we can laugh at it, right? Because we can laugh at this idea of an American Yankee being waking up in the Middle Ages. But in reality, really, this is the course, right, of a lot of human history, in particular as it plays out in the American mind at the end of the 19th, early 20th century. We are doing what? We are frontiersmen that are carving a place in the world that is much different than what came before. And we have this great belief that we have it in our power. We're optimistic. Why? Because of that romantic spirit that drove us on in the first place, that pragmatic emphasis on making the world anew, the imperial reality that we now have power that we didn't have before, and that progressive notion that it's easy for us to see wrong for right and to make right out of wrong. Now, one last thing that I'll end on. Might makes right is a horrible precept to live by. Right makes might is a better precept to live by. But we have to beware when we live by the precept that right makes might, that we don't get so caught up in our effort that that equation is inverted back to might making right. This is the problem. This is the predicament that we find ourselves in through much of the 20th century. It will make up a lot of our discussion as it relates to American foreign policy in our coverage in this class.